Hi, I'm Christopher Warnock, and today I'd like to talk about the role of intuition in astrological prediction, primarily focusing on medieval and Renaissance astrology. When I started out as an astrologer, people would ask me, "Are you psychic?" And my typical response was, "No, this is science," in the sense that it's a technique, it's learnable, and I wasn't just pulling stuff out of the air. But 2 decades later, I realized that intuition plays a really key role in astrological prediction. And so let me start off with reading Aphorism 1 of the Centiloquium. That's 100 aphorisms attributed to Ptolemy. And that says, "Judgment must be regulated by thyself, as well as by the science. For it is not possible that particular forms of events should be declared by any person, however scientific, since the understanding conceived only a general idea of some event and not its particular form. It is therefore necessary for him who practices to adopt inference. They only that are inspired by the deity can predict particulars." And this is the Ashman translation of the Centiloquium. That's very dense, and it's in this sort of 17th century English, hard to kind of understand, but I really think it does lay it out in terms of what's exactly going on when we do astrological prediction and why it's aphorism 1. Essentially, my understanding of traditional astrology, that's the medieval, Renaissance, and Hellenistic forms, are that they use a great deal of technique, but the technique must also be combined with intuition in order to accurately predict. But that being said, the intuition does not overthrow the technique. Rather, the technique sort of sets the basic parameters and range of possibilities, and then the intuition assists in making the correct prediction from amongst the choices offered by the technique as applied to the chart. So for example, if you have a relationship horary, the ruler of the seventh signifies the person asked about, that's the quested, and if their significator is afflicted, then that can indicate that the person is unable, unwilling, or unsuitable for the desired relationship. So we have a range of possibilities that the chart sets forth. Which of these three the person actually is going to depend on the circumstances, and then we're going to determine that by looking at the other factors in the chart and the intuition of the astrologer. So for instance, with a significator of the person at the quested is afflicted by an applying square of a debilitated malefic, then we might say, well, this is an external factor that's problematic for the relationship. For example, the radix 10th or turn 10th ruler afflicting the 7th ruler might indicate that the person is having career problems, and that's getting in the way of them having a relationship. On the other hand, if the 7th ruler is in detriment, it's an internal problem. The person maybe is not interested or is not the kind of person that can have a relationship. But again, we're not going to be overthrowing the chart and saying, oh, the first ruler, which signifies the person asking the question, the querent, is afflicted, the 7th ruler is afflicted, they're separating from each other, but my intuition is positive, so I predict a long-term committed relationship. That's just not how traditional astrology typically works, or should it work. So in this particular interplay of intuition and technique is different, I think, in medieval Renaissance astrology from modern astrology. I think that I've certainly seen some incredibly accurate predictions from modern astrologers that can be really amazingly at doing predictions. But the sense that I get is that they're using the chart sort of like a crystal ball or a tarot reading, that immediately they're jumping to using their psychic abilities. It's essentially a way of efficiently pulling out their psychic view of the circumstances and triggering off their intuition. And I think the tip-off there is that sometimes you'll see them doing this and, it's like, wow, where did they come up with that from? It's very accurate, but it's really not based on astrological technique, or it's very variable from chart to chart, and then also it's really not teachable. So it's something that they're able to do very well themselves, but they're not able to teach somebody else to do a similar type of reading. Whereas with traditional astrology, there's a tremendous amount of technique, and it's essentially all teachable. I mean, you can walk through the source, you have a teacher that understands it, can explain it to you, and you can base it. There's also very much a commonality. I mean, if you, for example, a QHP, these are people in the lineage of Olivia Berkeley who sort of revived traditional horary. Most of those people, about 80% of the way that they're going to approach it is very similar because they're coming from the same lineage. They've been taught by the same teachers with the same technique. Which is not to say that this balance between intuition and technique is always maintained in medieval Renaissance astrology. Again, another tip-off in this area that we're dealing with a preponderance of intuition is where there's many variant and contradictory rules and the sources disagree. For example, timing and location. The rules for timing horary events, they just don't agree. They're all over the place, and they're quite difficult to apply. And so not even all charts even have timing indicators. So, I mean, I occasionally get the timing right, but I'm always really pleased when I do it and I look upon it as a bonus. Lost items, that's another, I think, an area that relies very heavily on intuition because we're using location and we're using location indicators. William Lilly, probably the most famous 17th century English horary astrologer, I think was very intuitively gifted at lost item horaries. I mean, you can take a look at his lost fish horary. That's one of his most famous in Christian Astrology at page 397 to 9. I mean, there's just no way that I would have gotten the detail that he's got out of that and been able to find it. Now, he's right, but I think that was probably a very intuitive reading as opposed to being one that was based really solidly on technique. So let's delve a little more deeply into what we're calling intuition. In fact, this is made up of a number of disparate factors that we've kind of all put together and juxtaposed with technique. Technique is fairly straightforward. On the most superficial level, this is rules. But of course, strict rules can never cover all the situations that arise in reality. So really, this also includes guidelines or models. Really, this is a methodology that relies on conscious awareness. That's really what we're talking about when we're talking about technique, where we can see the steps that are being taken. So if A equals B and B equals C and A equals C, it doesn't have to be limited to this kind of linear logic. The linear logic is certainly a type of technique. So this is certainly teachable and replicable for the vast majority of students. You can see what's going on. You can see the factors that are in play. And that essentially is, I think, what consists of technique. But what we've been calling intuition also includes, for example, judgment and experience. So if a client comes to me and says, when will my lover leave his wife and children and marry me as a horary, we really don't even need the horary to know the answer, and the answer is probably never. But he said he loved me. Yes, well, our experience lets us know that the quested, the person they're asking about in this case, well, they could be lying, or they could have really meant it when they said it, but, like a lot of men, they're quite capable of saying they love you and still wanting to stay with her, not break up their marriage and stay with their wife and kids. So, having seen this sort of thing over and over again, you bring that experience and you bring that judgment into play when someone's asking the question. So again, judgment and experience are not really teachable. They generally must be lived through and experienced and accepted to be usable. They're pretty much unseen, though you can certainly be replicated by someone who's had a similar experience. So classically, if you look for a definition of intuition, if you looked it up, I looked one up actually and Googled it. It says it's the ability to understand something immediately without the need for conscious reasoning. So rather than A, then B, then C, then D, which is sort of the linear way, intuition is sort of A, then Z without the intermediate steps. So really my sense of intuition is that it is a deep patterning recognition, an almost immediate gestalt or seeing of the overall whole upon experiencing one or more parts. I think that's what's going on. It's, again, a mysterious process. I mean, where is this coming from? But that, again, is my sense of one of the roots of intuition. So, and as well, when you think about this, there's internal and external aspects to intuition. So it's internal insofar as this is deep patterning is proceeding from the self, and there's an external insofar as the sources of this deep patterning and awareness are coming from the external from the self. So that might well be deemed oracular or prophetic. So again, we return to Aphorism 1 of the Centiloquium. They only who are inspired that the deity can predict particulars. So, so I think you could go into much more detail about this, but certainly a traditional astrologer who's been deeply engaged in what they're doing has the potential to include oracular insight in their prediction. Though this is likely to be intermittent, partial and unusual. That's not to say that every horary astrologer is the Pythia of Delphi or every reading is prophetic, but this is a potentiality that's present, and it's something that really I think does play a role in giving us the most accurate, to getting us that last sort of 20-25% or whatever that the technique doesn't give us. We have the intuition, and then even intuition, we have this ability to function in a sense as an oracle, to be a manifestation of these external forces. So, what can we do as a practical matter, as a medieval Renaissance astrologers, to develop our intuition. So obviously life experience is useful, and just trying to pay attention to what's really happening as opposed to just labeling and filing it away, as we usually do, is very useful. When you're experiencing things, try to pay attention, see what's happening, see the underlying patterning. Intuition can be difficult to develop because it's so mysterious. And one of the problems we have with intuition is even recognizing it. It's very easy to mix in our hopes and desires with intuition. I know I won the lottery. Well, do you know you won the lottery, or is that just what you're hoping for? Well, I know I'm going to get back with X. Well, again, is that knowing or hoping? So really working on being objective, stepping back from the situation, and being aware of our emotional attachments is also so very important. We're trying to figure out here really that deep knowing, that as opposed to just getting our emotional state or the emotional state of our client or whoever we're dealing with mixed in with our judgment. So I think another key problem is doubt. I think all of us are getting intuitive flashes. We have a tendency to dismiss them, either because we doubt ourselves or the doubt that's sort of engendered by the basic atheistic materialistic approach that the society follows. Everything is supposedly random and meaningless, in which case there's no point in intuition. There's no point in, it's not prophetic, it's just a coincidence. If you keep thinking that, you're obviously not going to be able to be very intuitive. Instead, the intuition is pointing us to this entirely patterned, if mysterious, cosmos. So if we can just start paying attention and see what's emotion and see what's intuition, and then suspend hope, fear, and doubt, we're really well on our way to developing our intuition. And really seriously, intuition does get better with practice. Do lots of real prediction. For if you're doing horror or natal readings, if you don't know the answer when you start, you do the reading, you look at the chart, you look at your sources, you make your prediction, and then you find out what the results are. That's very useful. If you're doing hindsight, if you're looking at Hitler's chart or Einstein's chart, this is not going to help you develop your intuition. You already know what's happening, and so there's no way to see whether that's intuitive or not. So the other thing to do is just in your day-to-day life to watch for the sort of repeated patternings, and not to worry about what they mean. Because that whole, this means this or means that. Just see the patterning and just kind of be aware of it. Don't worry about trying to figure out what's going on, but just be aware of the patterning. My wife and I call this looping. Jung called it synchronicity, and these are events that are connected not by material causality, but by time and by meaning. A minor example, just the other day I was reading about black jaguars, because I was doing some internet surfing and South America came up. So then, within an hour later, I was watching a movie. I think it was something that was had nothing to do with South America or animals or whatever. It was like about the 60s, I think, in London. And all of a sudden, this black jaguar pops up. So again, what does that mean? Again, I have no idea. But to me, that's a significant patterning. If you're like, that's random or whatever, again, you're blocking your intuition. So, it's like, if you're going to be an astrologer, you're really going to, the patterning, that's got to be really key for you. And if you're sitting around saying, there's no patterning, and then you're blocking yourself. So again, very problematic. But if you open to it, if you stop doubting yourself, if you stop doubting your abilities and stop doubting that there's patterning in the cosmos, again, not to say you understand it, but just accept that there's patterning there, then it's going to be much more effective in terms of developing your intuition. As I go through this, I realize, again, more and more that intuition is a really key part. And as if you can learn the technique fairly, in a fairly easy and straightforward way, the intuition is a much deeper process. But ultimately, you're going to want to be able to do that to understand in the charts and get your predictions. And for me, what's the point has come to that I don't doubt myself anymore. That if I have a sense about a chart, I'm like, you know what, this is going to be correct. And it has become a way for me to really amazingly increase my ability to predict, and also has given me a really amazing sense of meaning and purpose, and understanding how I fit into that in this incredible cosmos. So I hope you enjoyed that today. Like I said, really was enjoying sharing this with everyone, and I hope that you'll go ahead and work on your intuition as well.